Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're tackling a World Bank report called Reshaping Norms, A New Way Forward.
Okay.
You've asked us to pull out the most important insights on South Asia's economic outlook,
Uh-huh.
particularly given the war in Ukraine,
Okay.
and also their analysis of gender norms in the region,
Right.
which always seems to be a hot topic.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
The report kind of weaves together economic recovery and the social norms, really highlighting the complexities South Asia is grappling with.
Yeah, it's not just about numbers, right? There's a human element to it all.
Yeah.
The report talks about this uneven recovery. South Asia is emerging from the pandemic,
Uh-huh.
but facing all these obstacles.
Yeah.
Inflation, fiscal deficits, current account deficits.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to run a marathon with weights strapped to their ankles.
It's a great analogy. And the report digs into how this recovery is impacting various sectors,
Right.
countries,
Right.
and even groups within South Asia differently.
Yeah.
Some are definitely weathering the storm better than others.
Yeah.
For instance, major exporters are actually seeing higher export values than before the pandemic,
Okay.
partly due to those rising global commodity prices we mentioned.
Right.
But then you have sectors like tourism still struggling to recover,
Uh-huh.
especially in a place like Sri Lanka, which is dealing with a balance of payments crisis on top of everything else.
Right. It's like some boats are riding the waves and others are taking on water.
Yeah.
And speaking of rough seas, this report was released in April 2022, just as the war in Ukraine's impact was starting to be felt globally.
Right.
Did they manage to account for that in their analysis?
They did. And this is where it gets really compelling. The report acknowledges that the war adds a whole new layer of complexity
Right.
to the region's economic recovery.
Yeah.
Even though South Asia doesn't have strong direct trade ties with Russia or Ukraine,
Uh-huh.
the conflict's impact on global commodity prices has a ripple effect. Think about it. Higher energy prices mean increased costs for businesses,
Yeah.
which can lead to higher prices for consumers.
Yeah.
Supply chain disruptions further complicate things, potentially slowing down economic growth.
It's a domino effect. And I imagine it hits some countries harder than others, depending on their reliance on those global markets.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the potential slowdown in demand for South Asian exports from Europe,
Yeah.
a key trading partner for many countries in the region. It's like a storm surge hitting an already vulnerable coastline.
Exactly. And on top of those external pressures,
Right.
the report also delves into the internal challenges,
Uh-huh.
particularly rising inflation.
Yeah.
They found that food and energy prices were already on the rise before the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
Global energy prices had started climbing in the second half of 2021.
So even before the war, there were already warning signs flashing.
Precisely. They use edible oil inflation as a prime example.
Okay.
It had reached over 20% in Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. Wow. Now layer the war's impact on top of that, and you can see how inflation becomes a major headache for policymakers.
Right.
It erodes purchasing power,
Yeah.
makes it harder for families to afford basic necessities,
Uh-huh.
and can even lead to social unrest.
It's like a double whammy,
Yeah.
hitting consumers right where it hurts their wallets. And what about those rising global oil prices? We know they're impacting consumers at the gas pump and grocery store,
Right.
but how does that trickle down within the South Asian economies?
Well, the report's analysis gets into the nitty-gritty of how these global oil price increases affect consumers and producers differently.
Okay.
For consumers, the impact is somewhat cushioned.
Interesting.
Think about it. Crude oil is just one component of the final price of the goods they buy at the store.
Uh-huh.
But for producers, those dealing directly with the increased input costs of energy,
Right.
the impact is much more significant.
So businesses are really feeling the squeeze.
Absolutely. The report found that wholesale prices in India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka are highly correlated with global oil prices.
Interesting.
It's a direct link,
Uh-huh.
and it puts immense pressure on their profit margins.
And that brings us to another concerning point raised in the report, the stability of South Asia's financial sector.
Yeah.
What's the story there? I'm getting a sense of impending doom here.
Well, the report does highlight some pre-existing vulnerabilities.
Okay.
In the financial sectors of many South Asian countries, even before the pandemic hit,
Right.
they had higher rates of non-performing loans compared to other emerging markets.
Uh-huh.
And some, like India, were already dealing with stress in their non-bank financial institutions.
And for those who might not be familiar, non-performing loans are essentially loans that borrowers are no longer repaying right.
Exactly.
Sort of like a canary in the coal mine for financial health. But what about the pandemic's impact?
Yeah.
I imagine that threw a wrench into everything.
It did. Many countries implemented lending support measures during the pandemic, like loan moratoriums, essentially temporary pauses on loan repayments.
Okay.
These acted as lifelines for businesses struggling to stay afloat during lockdowns and economic disruptions.
Right.
However, as the report points out, these measures may have masked the true extent of the financial distress.
So it was a temporary fix, but one that could potentially backfire down the road.
Exactly. As these supports are withdrawn, those hidden problems could resurface, potentially leading to a wave of loan defaults,
Okay.
further straining the financial system.
The report paints a concerning picture of potential financial instability. I'm wondering, based on your expertise, how likely is this time bomb scenario to play out?
Right.
And what factors could mitigate the risk?
It's a valid concern, and the report doesn't shy away from that, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
The likelihood of this scenario fully unfolding depends on a multitude of factors, including the pace of economic recovery, the effectiveness of government policies, and those ever-present global economic headwinds. If South Asian countries can address those underlying vulnerabilities in their financial sectors, diversify their economies, and implement sound fiscal policies,
Right.
they can mitigate the risk of a full-blown crisis.
So there's a glimmer of hope,
Yes,
but it's a precarious situation nonetheless.
precisely.
Yeah.
And as if that weren't enough, the report goes on to analyze how the war in Ukraine further exacerbates these financial sector worries.
Okay.
Remember those ripple effects we discussed? The war adds volatility to global financial markets, making investors nervous about putting their money in emerging markets.
So investors get spooked and pull their money out, and that puts pressure on foreign exchange reserves, right?
Right.
It's like a negative feedback loop.
It can also make it more expensive for those countries to borrow money in the future,
Right.
further hindering their ability to invest in critical infrastructure and social programs. So you see, it's a complex web of interconnected challenges, both internal and external.
It paints a rather sobering picture, but I'm holding on to that glimmer of hope you mentioned. Speaking of hope, I was particularly interested in the report's discussion of potential solutions, specifically the idea of greening the tax system.
Okay.
That caught my attention because I've been trying to be more mindful of my own carbon footprint lately.
It's certainly a timely topic. This is where the report connects economic policies with environmental goals in a really intriguing way.
Yeah.
The core argument is that a transition to cleaner renewable energy sources is crucial for South Asia,
Okay.
not just for the sake of mitigating climate change, which is a global imperative, but also for bolstering energy security in the region.
It's about creating a more sustainable and resilient future, both economically and environmentally.
Exactly. And one of the key instruments they propose is green taxes, like a carbon tax.
That's an intriguing idea, but I'm also thinking about the potential downsides. Could a carbon tax disproportionately burden low-income households?
Right. And how might we address that concern?
You're raising a crucial point. The design and implementation of a carbon tax would need to be carefully considered to ensure that it doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities.
Yeah.
For example, revenue generated from the tax could be used to fund social safety net programs.
Yeah.
Or provide targeted subsidies to help low-income households transition to cleaner energy sources.
So it's not just about slapping a tax on carbon, it's about using the revenue generated to create a more equitable and just transition.
Exactly.
I'm curious, did the report delve into how a carbon tax might play out in practice?
They did. What's fascinating is that they actually ran a simulation of what would happen if South Asian countries implemented a carbon tax.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
What did their simulation reveal?
The simulation showed that even when factoring in the costs of implementation, a carbon tax could potentially generate net benefits for the region.
That's a surprising finding. I was expecting it to be a trade-off.
Yeah. Economic benefits at the expense of environmental costs or vice versa.
Right.
But you're saying it could be a win-win.
That's what the simulation suggests.
Wow.
And one of the key drivers of these net benefits is the revenue generated from the tax, which could be used for a variety of purposes.
So it's not just about making fossil fuels more expensive. It's about using that revenue strategically to invest in a greener future.
Exactly. The report suggests using the revenue to strengthen social safety nets, providing a buffer for those most affected by the transition to a low-carbon economy.
Right.
They also suggest investing in renewable energy infrastructure, promoting energy efficiency, and supporting research and development of new clean technologies.
So it's a multi-pronged approach that tackles both the economic and environmental challenges simultaneously.
Precisely.
Mm.
And on top of that, the report highlights how reducing reliance on fossil fuels would have additional co-benefits, such as improved air quality,
Uh-huh.
which can lead to better public health outcomes.
It's a fascinating example of how interconnected everything is. We can't talk about economic policy without considering the environmental implications and vice versa.
Exactly. And this interconnectedness is a theme that runs throughout the report, as we'll see when we delve into their analysis of gender norms.
Okay, now I'm really excited to dive into that. It's a topic that always sparks a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
The report takes a close look at this, especially in the context of women's labor force participation in South Asia. What are some of the key takeaways here?
One of the first things the report highlights is that South Asia lags behind other regions when it comes to gender equality, both in terms of outcomes and in attitudes.
That's a broad statement. What are some of the specific indicators that point to this lag?
For example, women's labor force participation rates in many South Asian countries are among the lowest in the world.
Okay.
This means that a significant portion of the female population is excluded from contributing to the economy, which has implications for economic growth and development.
It's a loss of potential talent and productivity.
Exactly. And those gaps were actually made worse by the pandemic, further highlighting the vulnerabilities women face in these economies.
So COVID-19 was a setback for gender equality in the region.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
But the report doesn't just stop at stating the problem.
Right.
It digs into the underlying reasons why this gap persists.
That's what I find so compelling about this report. They're not just presenting data, they're trying to understand the root causes. So what are some of those underlying reasons they identify?
One key factor they point to is the role of deeply ingrained social norms that dictate gender roles and limit women's opportunities.
Those unwritten rules that shape behavior and expectations.
Precisely. Things like the belief that a woman's place is in the home,
Okay.
restrictions on her mobility outside the home,
Uh-huh.
and the expectation that men should be the primary breadwinners.
Right.
All of these contribute to limiting women's access to education, employment, and even healthcare.
It's like they're navigating a world designed for someone else.
Exactly. And the report delves into specific examples of how these norms play out in real life. They talk about how many women in South Asia aren't permitted to travel outside the home alone
Right.
due to concerns about safety and purity, which restricts their ability to work, attend school, or even socialize.
It's those invisible barriers, the ones we don't always see, that can be the most difficult to overcome.
Absolutely. They even cite research from India showing that rural married women often interact with very few people outside their immediate family.
Wow.
This limited social interaction restricts their access to information support networks and ultimately their opportunities.
It's almost like they're trapped in a cycle of limited choices.
Exactly. And this ties back to the report's core argument that these deeply ingrained social norms are a major obstacle to economic development and gender equality in South Asia.
It's a complex issue with far-reaching implications. Before we delve further into the report's analysis of gender norms, let's take a quick pause. What stands out to you from what we've covered so far? What's piquing your curiosity?
It's fascinating how the report doesn't just diagnose the problem. It also explores potential solutions.
Okay.
It dives into how these deeply ingrained social norms,
Mm-hmm.
while persistent, aren't set in stone.
Right.
They can and do change.
That's encouraging. But how do these shifts happen? Is it just a matter of time, or are there specific things that can accelerate change?
The report identifies several catalysts.
Okay.
One is exposure to new ideas and experiences.
Uh-huh.
For example, when women have the opportunity to participate in education
Right.
or the workforce, it broadens their horizons
Okay.
and can challenge those traditional beliefs about their roles.
It's like stepping outside of that limited sphere and realizing there are other ways to live, other possibilities.
Exactly. And the report emphasizes that these experiences don't just impact the women themselves.
Right.
They can have a ripple effect on their families and communities.
Interesting.
When a woman starts earning an income or pursuing higher education,
Uh-huh.
it can shift her family's perception of what she's capable of.
It's like she's breaking down those preconceived notions, proving that women can be both caregivers and contributors to the economy.
Yes, and it challenges those traditional gender roles we were talking about.
Right.
It's also interesting how the report points out that younger generations can also drive change,
Okay.
as their attitudes and behaviors often influence older generations.
So it's like a reverse mentorship, where the younger generation's embrace of more egalitarian values can inspire older generations to rethink their own beliefs.
Exactly.
It makes me think of that Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
Yeah.
But it's not just about individual experiences, right? What about the role of government policies and programs? Can they play a role in shifting these norms?
Absolutely. The report argues that policies and programs can be critical tools for breaking down those barriers we discussed.
Okay.
They highlight the importance of investing in infrastructure, like reliable transportation and access to electricity. These seemingly basic things can empower women
Yeah.
by making it easier and safer for them to work outside the home.
It's about creating a more enabling environment, removing those practical obstacles that can hold women back.
Exactly. And then there are those more targeted interventions like providing access to affordable childcare
Right.
or promoting girls' education. These can have a direct impact on women's ability to participate in the economy and society.
It's about leveling the playing field, so to speak.
Yes. And the report also mentions legal changes that could be powerful tools for challenging discriminatory norms,
Okay.
such as granting women equal inheritance rights or strengthening laws against domestic violence.
It's about creating a legal framework that supports gender equality.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But the report also cautions that simply enacting laws or implementing programs isn't enough.
Right.
They emphasize the importance of what they call a norms-aware approach to policy making.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly does a norms-aware approach entail? It sounds like it goes beyond just checking boxes.
It means taking those deeply ingrained social norms into account
Okay.
when designing and implementing policies.
Right.
The report argues that many well-intentioned interventions can backfire
Yeah.
or fall short of their goals
Yeah.
if they fail to consider the social context in which they're being implemented.
So it's not just about changing laws or offering programs. It's about understanding the underlying beliefs and expectations that shape people's choices.
Exactly.
Okay.
For example, they talk about programs aimed at boosting women's skills in education.
Right.
While these programs are undoubtedly beneficial, they're often less effective in societies where women face strong social pressures to stay home.
Okay.
Even if a woman acquires new skills, she might not be able to use them if her family or community disapproves.
So it's like pushing against a tide of societal expectations. Even with the best intentions, it can be a tough battle.
It can be. And this is where understanding those underlying norms is so crucial.
Yeah.
The report also mentions a phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance that I find fascinating.
Okay, I love when you get into the nitty-gritty details. Tell me more about pluralistic ignorance.
Well, pluralistic ignorance is this idea that people often misperceive the attitudes and beliefs of those around them.
Okay.
They might privately support a more progressive view, like women working outside the home,
Right.
but they mistakenly believe that others hold more conservative views.
Interesting.
As a result, they conform to what they perceive to be the norm, even if it doesn't align with their personal beliefs.
It's like they're trapped in this echo chamber of assumptions, afraid to speak up or act differently.
Yes, and reports suggest that this can be a significant barrier to change
Uh-huh.
because it makes people hesitant to openly challenge those perceived norms.
Yeah.
Even if they'd personally like to see things change, it's like they're waiting for someone else to make the first move.
So how do you break out of this conformity trap? How do you encourage people to act on their own beliefs, even if they think they're in the minority?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The report suggests that information campaigns can play a role here.
Okay.
By revealing that support for more progressive views is actually greater than people think.
Uh-huh.
You can empower individuals to speak up and act on their own beliefs.
So it's about creating a sense of shared understanding, breaking down those walls of misperception.
Exactly.
It's like giving people permission to be themselves, to embrace those values that they might have been hiding.
Yeah.
But information alone isn't always enough, is it?
Yeah.
What about those more practical barriers we talked about earlier?
You're absolutely right. That's where those tangible solutions come in.
Okay.
Things like providing access to affordable childcare,
Right.
improving transportation infrastructure, addressing safety concerns. All of these can help create the conditions where women feel empowered to make different choices.
It's about aligning incentives and removing those practical obstacles that can make it difficult for women to participate fully in society.
Precisely. But it's not just about changing the environment. It's also about changing those underlying beliefs and expectations. The report talks about how some successful interventions have combined tangible solutions with efforts to challenge those harmful norms more directly.
That makes sense. It's a two-pronged approach. But what do those norms challenging interventions look like in practice? Do they give any concrete examples?
They do. One example they highlight is a program in Nepal called Samandit Jeevan, which translates to living with dignity.
Interesting.
This program involved a series of workshops that bring together married women, their husbands, and their in-laws.
Wow, that's a bold approach, bringing everyone together to have those tough conversations.
It is. And the goal is to facilitate open and honest discussions about gender roles.
Okay.
And encourage families to support women's economic participation.
So it's not just about educating women, it's about engaging their families and communities in the process of change.
Exactly. And the report points out that this program has seen some success in increasing women's involvement in income-generating activities.
Okay.
It's also shifted attitudes within those families about women's ability to contribute financially.
It's about changing perceptions, both within the family and within the wider community. And it sounds like it ties back to that idea of pluralistic ignorance we talked about earlier. By involving families in these discussions, you're showing them that support for women's economic participation might be greater than they think.
That's a great connection. It's about breaking down those barriers of isolation, creating a sense of collective support for change.
Another example the report cites is the success of the ready-made garment sector in Bangladesh. I read about how it's been a major driver of economic growth for the country.
It has been. But what's particularly interesting from a norms perspective is that it's provided opportunities for women who might not have otherwise been able to work outside the home.
So it's created a sort of virtuous cycle, economic opportunity leading to social change.
Exactly. And the report points out that these changes in behavior, women entering the workforce in large numbers, have also influenced attitudes and beliefs within those communities.
Okay.
It's a testament to how economic empowerment can be a powerful tool for shifting norms.
It's like they're proving through their actions that women can contribute to the economy and society in meaningful ways.
Yes, and it challenges those long-held assumptions about women's capabilities. The report makes a strong case for investing in women's economic participation, not just for the economic benefits, but also for its potential to drive those broader social changes.
It's about recognizing that gender equality is not just a moral imperative, it's also an economic one. When women thrive, everyone benefits. But it's not just about empowering women in isolation, is it? The report also emphasizes the importance of engaging men and boys in these efforts.
Absolutely. We can't talk about gender equality without addressing the role of men and boys.
Right.
The report talks about the importance of challenging those harmful masculinity norms that often underpin gender inequality.
Those societal expectations of what it means to be a real man, expectations that can be limiting for men as well.
Exactly. Things like the pressure to be the sole provider, the suppression of emotions, the normalization of violence.
Yeah.
The report argues that by addressing these harmful norms, we can create a more equitable society for everyone.
It's about expanding the definition of masculinity, allowing men to express themselves more fully and contribute to a more gender-equal world.
Precisely. And the report suggests that education programs, media campaigns, and even community dialogues can play a role in promoting those more positive and equitable masculinities.
It's about creating a space for men to be part of the solution.
Exactly. And these efforts to engage men and boys need to go hand in hand with efforts to empower women. It's not about pitting one against the other. It's about working together to create a more just and equitable society for all.
Right.
But this brings us to a really important point that the report emphasizes.
Okay.
The persistence of these norms often comes down to power dynamics.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about how power plays into all of this.
Well, the report argues that gender norms are often deeply intertwined with power imbalances. The belief that men are superior to women, that they're entitled to control women's lives. These beliefs are often used to justify and maintain those power disparities.
It's like those norms serve to reinforce the existing power structures, keeping women in a subordinate position.
Exactly. And the report cautions that efforts to shift these norms can face backlash.
Right.
Especially when they threaten the power and privilege of those in dominant positions.
So change can be met with resistance, especially from those who stand to lose their advantage. It's like a tug of war for control.
It can be. And that's why the report stresses the importance of addressing those power dynamics directly.
Okay.
They argue that policies and programs that aim to empower women and promote gender equality need to be designed with this in mind.
So it's not just about providing opportunities or changing laws, it's about shifting those underlying power structures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about challenging those deeply ingrained beliefs and structures that perpetuate gender inequality.
Okay, but how do we do that? What are some specific strategies for tackling these power imbalances?
The report highlights a few key approaches. One is promoting women's leadership and decision-making power,
Okay.
whether it's in government business or community organizations.
All right.
Increasing women's representation at all levels can help challenge those traditional power structures.
It's about ensuring that women have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about representation for representation's sake. It's about ensuring that women's voices and perspectives are heard,
Right.
and that their needs and priorities are reflected in policies and programs.
It's about bringing those diverse experiences and perspectives to the table.
Precisely. Another important strategy the report highlights is addressing violence against women and girls.
Okay.
Violence, whether it's physical, sexual, or emotional,
Uh-huh.
is often used as a tool to maintain those power imbalances and control women's lives.
It's about creating a culture of safety and respect where women are free from fear and intimidation.
Exactly. The report argues that investing in prevention programs, strengthening legal frameworks, and providing support services for survivors of violence are all essential for dismantling those power structures that perpetuate gender inequality.
It's a holistic approach that tackles the root causes of violence while also providing support for those who've been harmed.
Right. And finally, the report emphasizes the importance of challenging those broader cultural narratives and stereotypes that often justify and normalize gender inequality.
Right.
This can involve working with the media to promote more positive and equitable representations of women, engaging men and boys as allies for change,
Yeah.
and promoting education programs that challenge gender stereotypes.
It's about changing the conversation, reshaping those societal norms that have long held women back.
Precisely. And it's a long-term endeavor.
Right.
But the report makes a compelling case for why this is essential for achieving sustainable and inclusive development.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into those deeply entrenched gender norms. It's clear that this is a complex issue with no easy solutions.
Right.
But the report offers some valuable insights into how we can begin to address these challenges and create a more equitable and just society. It feels like we've been on quite a journey with this deep dive, from those uneven economic recoveries and the ripple effects of global events to the complexities of gender norms and those power dynamics at play. It's a lot to process. I'm curious, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with today?
It's tough to narrow it down to just one. But for me, it's that interconnectedness we keep coming back to. You can't talk about economic recovery in isolation. It's all intertwined with those global forces, sustainable policies, and those deep-seated social norms. If we ignore any one of those pieces, the puzzle remains incomplete.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. You can't just focus on one side. You have to look at the whole picture. And that's what this report does so well. It lays out those connections in a way that's both thought-provoking and insightful.
Exactly. And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. We're giving our listener a foundation to explore these topics further. Maybe they'll dig into the report's country-specific analyses or investigate those successful interventions that have actually shifted gender norms.
Maybe they'll even start to connect these insights to their own work or their community. There's always that potential for personal application, which is what makes learning so exciting.
Absolutely. It's about empowering people to see the world through a new lens and to use that knowledge to make a difference.
Speaking of new perspectives, before we wrap up, I'm curious, was there anything in the source material that sparked a thought for you? Something that wasn't explicitly addressed but is worth pondering?
You know, there was this one idea that really stuck with me. The report touched on the concept of a conformity trap. This idea that societies can get stuck in a cycle of harmful norms even when individuals might privately desire change.
That's a powerful concept. Is like everyone's waiting for someone else to break the mold, but no one wants to be the first to rock the boat.
Exactly. And it raises a really interesting question. What are the levers for breaking free from these conformity traps? What are those tipping points that can lead to widespread social change?
It makes me think about those pivotal moments in history where a critical mass of people said, enough is enough, and they dared to challenge the status quo. But it's not always about grand gestures, right? Sometimes it's about those small, everyday acts of defiance.
Yes. It can be as simple as speaking up when you hear a sexist joke, or supporting a woman-owned business, or challenging those gender stereotypes in your own family. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to that ripple effect of change.
It's like that famous quote often attributed to Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
I love that quote. And it brings me back to that idea of interconnectedness. We're all connected, and our actions, both big and small, can have an impact. It's about recognizing that power and using it to create a more just and equitable world.
That's a powerful message to end on. So to our listener out there, remember, knowledge is power. And now you're equipped to navigate these complex issues, but it doesn't stop there. Take this knowledge, share it, discuss it, and most importantly, act on it. Let's break free from those conformity traps and build a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Here's to a future shaped by awareness action and that unwavering belief in our collective power to create change.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deeper, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.